Welcome to the Been There, Done That podcast with Angela Dunn-Cartledge. Hey there, it's Angela from Been There, Done That. If you're navigating the wild, unpredictable world of grief, I want to invite you to something special. It's called Messy Mornings, and it's our free weekly newsletter filled with real talk, gentle reminders, and support that actually meets you where you are. Each week, I'll send you stories, reflections, healing prompts straight to your inbox. No fluff, no pressure, just the space to release, feel, and heal. You don't have to do this alone. Head over to donethatpodcast.com and sign up for Messy Mornings. It's totally free and it's made with you in mind. I've been there, and let's walk through this together. Hi, everybody. You're listening to the Been There, Done That podcast. I'm your host, Angela Dunn-Cartledge, and I am here with the most amazing Barbara Hunt. I cannot wait to have this conversation. Barbara, thank you so much for being here.
You're so welcome. I'm really delighted to be here. Thank you, Angela.
Tell us who you are, what you bring to the world, and what we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so I'm Barbara J. Hunt. It helps if you put the J in, because then you can find me, because there's lots of Barbara Hunts. And there's slightly fewer Barbara J. Hunts. And my particular speciality and passion is the very much misunderstood and quite controversial subject of forgiveness. I'm also a coach and a musician, but my whole interest really is around personal and spiritual development. How do we become who we are? How do we evolve as human beings? What do we need to manage living in our crazy world? And really interested in the tools that we can learn, and particularly interested in forgiveness as a mental health practice. So a bit like a yoga practice or a meditation practice. My invitation, if you like, my passion and message is really a vision for forgiveness as a mental health practice, not a spiritual as in bypassy one or a spiritual religious, but as a mental and emotional well-being practice.
The thing that resonated with me when I first met you was this idea that forgiveness is not looked at as a mental health purpose, path. That is where I think we got to be kindred spirits, is that it is such a different way to look at what happens to us and how we process it, as to realize that by forgiving, we are alleviating ourselves in the process, not just them. Talk us through your definition of forgiveness and what that means in relationship.
Thank you. It's always a great place to start. You know, what do we really mean about forgiveness? What is that? What are we trying to do? And I sometimes describe it as quite a difficult maneuver, a bit like the equivalent of a yoga maneuver where you're trying to get just your big toes to go up without moving all your other toes. It's an unfamiliar muscle, like an inner muscle. But forgiveness means, and this, I got this definition from one of my first teachers about forgiveness, K. Bradford Brown, who created something called the More to Life program, or co-created it. And he says, forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what we did or didn't do. And I'll say it again because it's quite long. So forgiveness is the absolute refusal to hold ill will against someone for what they did or didn't do. And I describe it really as a bit like, so our grievances, we collect them up. We pretend we don't, but we do. We collect up our daily grievances and we keep a score, an inner score about what's fair, what's not fair. And so the absolute refusal to hold a grievance, and I'm really clear, like the grievances can be like really little things, like the everyday grudges and little gripes and stuff that we have in our everyday lives. You may be an annoying colleague, maybe your partner doesn't do this thing or that thing, or does that thing and not that thing. Kids, parents, like all the little things as well as the really big things. So the principles that I talk about, they apply right across the board. So the refusal to hold ill will, a grievance, a grudge, a gripe, The absolute refusal looks like this. So you're choosing to put down your your grievance or your resentment. That, I mean, really, the bottom line about forgiveness is it's saying, I choose to not judge, hate, or hold you in disdain because of what you've done, including to me. So that is such a radical position. And I think part of what happens with when we're talking about forgiveness is a lot of the stories that we learn are often about very challenging big things. And again, what I focus on are the little daily things, that which is why it becomes interesting to us about our mental and emotional well-being, because it's our emotional health. And it can be the big betrayals. A lover leaves us, or there's something very challenging that happens in our career, or something stolen from us, or there's a terrible tragedy. So it does include those things, but still the mechanism is the absolute refusal, which is the choice to not hold the ill will. And it isn't easy to relinquish it for all kinds of reasons.
And I could even see, using your precious little pen holder as the analogy, that you might be able to take two out and then two more out. It is even harder to me. I agree that the idea of putting the entire thing down and then walking away seems to be very overwhelming.
Yes.
Am I following that appropriately,
Yes.
to know? Okay, good,
Well,
good.
it could be two things. So this could be the sum total of all my grievances, of all the different people that have offended me in the past or present, or potentially could offend me in the future. So it could be all of them, or it could be my grievances of one person. And there's just lots of little things. So when I sometimes hold online masterclasses in forgiveness, which is a practice class, so a bit like you come to a yoga class and do your practice, come to the forgiveness class and do your forgiveness practice. And I invite people to write their list of all the people that they hold any kind of grievance against. And that can go right back through life to the really earliest memories, but childhood troubles, a bully at school, or the teacher who didn't get you, or the teacher that you adored who didn't adore you, or the mean kid next door, all of those little things, to the first, heartbreak, maybe with a friend or with a partner, right the way through mum, dad, that whole thing. And when I was first invited to write my list about forgiveness, who felt like I needed to forgive or had held a grievance against, I started writing, and I thought pretty much everyone I've ever met, probably one way or the other, the significant people, and even the insignificant count. I can get quite annoyed about people who drive on my side of the road when I'm already there, that kind of thing.
You're not
So
invisible. I promise you're not. So I hear you.
yeah, and I think we do have little, that person did that thing, and do you see what they, like we are, and in fact, increasingly because of social media, encouraged to hold grievances and to air them publicly because it's addictive. So we get off on that kind of thing. But anyway, back to the list. So when you write your list of all the grievances, what I then encourage everybody to do is add up the number of years that they've held each one. And most people have at least a century's worth of resentment in their bodies, in their system, sometimes more. And then when I work with groups and I get us to do like a whole group, calculate the number of grievances, a number of years that we've been holding those grievances for that group, often it's thousands of years of resentment. And then you look on the world and you think, I think we may have a problem here. And this could explain quite a lot of why we are the way we are, is because there's so much build-up of resentment. And you wouldn't let that happen in your kitchen. You take the bins out. You don't just leave them to fester in your kitchen indefinitely, or maybe you do, but mostly we take them out periodically. But we don't do the same thing with our lives, with our emotional lives, with what's actually going on inside our hearts. And so that's really what my invitation is that we start attending to our inner life as if it's the trash that we need to take out.
really like that analogy because we don't smell it the same way as we would bins in our kitchen, right? It is that concept that we don't even recognize most of the time those micro grievances. I always like to think of them, especially on the trauma side of things. And I would think that this would be, depending on your perception, this would be considered micro trauma in that you're holding on to it as if it was um, life altering for you. And now it is life altering for you because you've held on to it for so long. I really love the idea that the container can hold everything or it can hold everything for each person. That if I truly get into my grudge holding, then I can fancy them up, I can put bows on them, I can do all kinds of things. Underneath it, it's still a bin. Right? I mean, to your point, it's still rubbish in there, but you're just fancying up the outside because you are so proud of the fact that you're holding on to it still, that you're protecting yourself. What are the reasons? And that again, I say protecting yourself, that's the Angela reason. So that's the reason I do it. What are the reasons that we do this? Why do we hold on to these grievances and keep them in our sweet little pen holders in our world, in our lives, in our soul?
It's such a great question. And I love the idea of micro grievances because that is really probably what most of them are, to be honest. Like the vast majority. And of course, there are things that happen, there are tragedies and traumas. So I'm not dismissing that. And I'm not saying it isn't hard to deal with those things. But the reasons we hold on are exactly as you're describing, that we're not conscious of them most of the time. They're subconscious, usually kind of survival mechanisms or related to our survival. So the protection is really, really important, because if something's happened and I've got this resentment that's like feels like solid, and like you can't get my heart through this protective device. But there are downsides to that we are not aware of. And one of the things really about resentment and those grievances is they're a little bit addictive. They're a little bit like the Pringles of our emotional life. You have one and then, oh, well, I might as well have another one because actually that person's just done exactly the same thing. So they're a little bit addictive, and you can get into like a bag sharing experience with a friend, who they'll relate that maybe they'd had this thing happen to them. And there's this sort of like, there is a bustling of like, well, how dare that happen? Because what we're often talking about is boundary transgressions, or somebody saying something that we probably have misinterpreted, because that's often where it's a misunderstanding. Maybe the person didn't mean to say that thing or look that way, but maybe their cat died that morning or something, but we think it's something about us, we take it personally. And I think the inner world is much more, I mean, I work in the realm of the imagination most of the time with my one-to-one clients. That's where we can do the most work and do, because there are no rules in the imagination. It can do anything. But what we're trying to do really is this sort of rebalancing injustices. So something happens and you feel at the disadvantage. And so there's, well, how do I bring things back? And we even talk about getting even. I want to get even. And I think sometimes revenge, the desire for revenge or retaliation, is so how I feel. Because if I do that thing to you that you've just done to me, then you'll know exactly how I feel. So in a very primitive way, the rebalancing of revenge, you can see that works. Apart from, then you're perpetuating 100 years of war. Where does it end? Because you got me back, so I need to get you back, but then I need to do it harder, and then you need to do it harder than me. So you can see that there's a limit to that approach. And so therefore, then there's something else that needs to happen for us to find some kind of equilibrium or to right the injustice, which is why we want the other person to apologize, to make amends. Like I'm going to hold my resentment until you regret the thing you did, or you take it back, or you make amends. Trouble is, sometimes the person doesn't even know that that's what's going on inside of you, or they don't want to because they think that they're right. They think it's that way around, or they've died, so they can't do that, or they're not in your life anymore, or it's so toxic you actually wouldn't want to be present in that relationship anymore for that to happen. So I'm kind of describing this like this weighing scales, but I think, like, metaphorically, that's what's going on inside of us, and it's completely unconscious.
I really love that. I mean, it is so powerful to hear that retaliation piece. Wow. I mean, it's something that I've really focused on wholly in my parenting, to be clear, because when you have 3 children at once, it naturally creates a sibling situation that not everybody gets. And so we really have focused on, we don't retaliate in this house. That's not the idea that we go after. But to your point, it is so much a part of our human nature to do that, to rebalance the scales. Really love the way that that really sits with me, because it is, you even said it, we get even, because that's the whole point of it, is that we feel lower now, so we want to make them feel lower somehow. And that is, it's a really powerful thing to realize that we are doing that with even a situation that neither of us could have controlled.
Hmm. Yeah.
Even things that are completely a tornado, and we want to blame it on a government agency because they didn't warn us in time. Or I talk about this so often with grief, that there is always some need, especially in acute grief, to blame, like I just was describing, on someone. It could be just some nebulous person over here, or it could be someone really close by and part of your inner circle. And yet here we are doing it, just talking about this at the foundational level of being able to get better at letting it go. And it is, to me, it is a fundamental healing process for all of the feelings. The reason we have grief is because something was there that now isn't there.
Yes.
Whatever it is, doesn't have to be a person. It can be a thing, a relationship, a job, a house, any of those things. When that adjusts, we feel uneven again. We feel disparate, and we don't want to feel that way. So we want to blame, or we want to throw a punch. We want to do whatever we have to do to make that back to normal. This is
Yeah.
powerful, Barbara.
Yeah, and it's such a good point as well to grief, because when I talk about grief and forgiveness, I talk about them like they're woven together. And I think some of the reasons why we find so hard to grieve is because we're holding resentments that we don't know we're holding. Exactly as you describe, you want to make somebody responsible for something, even if it's the death of someone. Like I think secretly, we don't talk about it, we resent the people who die around us. We don't say that. We say we're grieving, but there's resentment in there. And I think some of the reasons we find it hard to forgive is because we don't want to grieve. We don't want to leave the heart open and undefended. And I think some of the reasons we find it hard to grieve is because we're going to have to look at what needs to be forgiven. And there's this triple whammy that happens, I think, in most cases of forgiveness, but definitely in cases where it's to do with some kind of grief, is that there's often, unless you know someone is going to die ahead of time and you've had time to do the kind of reconciliation and repair and conversation, sometimes you can't say the things you need to say. So there's still things that you like might have been unexpressed, but there's things that you need to forgive the other person for. There may be things you need to be forgiven for, and then there's often self-forgiveness woven in there as well. What could I have done differently? should I have said something? Should I have not said something? Did I do the right thing? Was I there? Was I, like not, all of those things, the self-recrimination. So that can be quite complex. And again, it's all happening below the surface of the water, like the little tip of the iceberg, but all of the material that's going on inside of us that we have no training for. We don't even have very good language to describe it. And we have very little support for it, because even the talking therapies is, from my point of view, it is more about talking about the above the waterline. You obviously are talking about the below the waterline too, but you're not necessarily touching on the material that needs to be forgiven and or grieved, or both. And so I think there's a lot of complexity going on with what's underneath the protective device. And then there is also the other ways that we try and get even, like by having the moral high ground, or by using our resentments to blame the other person, or to justify our behavior, or to avoid something, like avoid leaving a relationship. We just let the resentment build up, but we stay in, as opposed to having the hard conversations and then choosing to leave.
It's so, I love your word, the complication of it, because we are simple yet complicated beings, right? And we, by our experiences, complicate it even further. We add to it, we add layers, we add lenses, all the things that we do to our particular perception. There's just so much. This is such a beautiful way and hopeful way, to me, to look at natural human loss of any kind. That it is a beautiful, and again, it's turning toward the light and saying, I don't want this to consume me. I don't want this to be all that I do. I want to be armored in something more joyful and more life-giving than in something that is going to hold me back and prevent me from feeling, prevent me from community, prevent me from fellowship, all of those things. There's so many things I could say. So let's take this to the opposite side of things. So you made reference to going all the way back to our childhoods and making a list. And how long have you held on to that? What do you see as being the ways in which someone could be needing to forgive, but they don't see it? How would it manifest? How would it show up in their life?
That's a really interesting question. I have a very all-embracing view of forgiveness. I just think everybody needs to forgive everybody all the time for everything. That's pretty much covers it. I used to work on a retreat, and we used to say, if it's not one thing, it's your mother. And everyone has work to do on their parents, because no parent is perfect. And everybody will be quite happy who is a parent, or their children will be quite happy to say about their parents, not perfect, even though we know our parents are obviously doing the best they can with the whatever their particular restraints and limitations are. But usually needs are not always met. Mistakes are made, divorces happen, it's like challenging, moving house, the birth of a sibling, all the like normal things that happen that could be good can be challenging. So if you have a very broad view of the need to, and I call it forgiveness work, but in some ways it's this kind of inner accounting. It's like an inner something or other that needs to happen to attend. I love that word. That's from Ian McGilchrist, who's the expert about the different sides of the brain. And he talks about attending to things. And I really like that. So it's attending to the injustices that have happened in our lives. And when we're not aware, there may be clues, because we may be repeating relationships. So there may be, this relationship really reminds me of the one I just left, or the one, 2 times before. Or often when I'm working with clients, we're working on the current relationship, but of course it goes all the way back to the primary parent of the opposite sex who's the foundation, or same sex, who's the foundation of your model for relationships with that person. So that there's that to attend to. And I think we're also, although I said we have a culture of sharing that kind of material, we don't necessarily recognize it as a resentment. We just think the other person is wrong. It's like, if they were different, well, then I'd be happy. So it's not, there's nothing to do with me, it's them doing the thing. So that's what we feel like, well, if they corrected their behavior, then I nothing would be wrong. And so sometimes it's completely unconscious. One of the biggest obstacles to getting anybody to consider doing forgiveness work is the fact that they're in denial that they need to do anything.
Yes. And that's to me, I talk about being in grief and silently suffering. You don't know why you are feeling stuck, or why you can't leave that relationship, or why the relationship is repeating, and you don't know why that's happening. So if you get to the fact that you have this thing that you never really dealt with, this feeling, I love that word. It makes you feel so proper and very, very justified, doesn't it? I have an injustice I have to right. So you do these things, you have these feelings that you never dealt with. To your original point about language, that's going to be my next question, because we can't support each other when we don't know how. We've never been taught. So then from there, we lack the ability to process, and then we hold on to it. If we don't process it, it's still sitting there. It's the rubbish bin with the bow on top. Just brilliant. It's so, again, I go back to the hope of it, because it is so, I'm always looking for a way to solve a problem. That's Angela's mantra in life. If I can solve the problem and I can feel better, that's what I want to do. And I don't mean numb or ignore or anything. I'm always looking for a better way, especially to process. That gives me another nugget. It gives me another way that I can get to a more peaceful state without having to go very much further than a list. Because I promise, with given permission, as you give to rake a list, oh boy, can we come up with our list. I bet that is the best scribbling session you get during those wonderful retreats and coaching sessions, because everybody can come up with a grievance list.
Yeah, and I really believe everyone's got something, and I host the open fields. I call them forgiveness fields, because it's like we're entering a field together. And you know that lovely Rumi poem, "Out beyond ideas of right doing and wrong doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there." So that's where we kind of gather, in the kind of Zoom field, and what's wonderful about having that as a practice, everyone's got something. Like within a month, I do them once a month. Something's going to happen that's going to really get up your nose. It's like there's going to be something, or you're going to remember, oh God, that really awful woman who I used to work, or there's going to be something, like a little something. And I really like, my invitation is always for us to have a really good sense of humor about our resentments, to really, like take it on, like they're earnest and they need to be dealt with. But we're all like that. It's part of the human condition, this whole inner accounting thing. And just back to your point as well, though, about grief, though, Angela, because when we grieve, some of our sorrow is about the unattended to material. Like there are all of these grievances, and I can definitely help to relieve the burden of your grief by clearing up a lot of what was not said or not heard or unexpressed or unforgiven. And so you're then left with, yes, the tragedy of the loss, but it's almost like cleaning up a wound. You're taking out as many of the bits of gravel as you can, and you're left with a clean wound that will take time to heal. And that's like you were saying about process. That's why it's worth your time.
And it can heal better, because it is a clean wound. And now it has open air and it has things that are out of its way. That I love that we're still using the pens as part of our story because um, Brian's aunt married us. My husband's aunt married us. And one of the things that she taught us in our pre-marriage counseling was that you don't want to have rocks in your pocket, that you don't hold on to those resentments, to those injustices, so that when it comes time to argue about something completely unrelated, you pull all the rocks out of your pocket and fling them at the other person, right? And so, in order to prevent that from happening, you process a little bit at a time. So, on the same vein that we're talking about having micro grievances, micro traumas, we're also saying micro processing. We're doing it as we go. We're doing it as we live instead of, no, I don't want to have conflict. I don't want to bring that up for whatever reason. There's a lack of safety, a lack of security. Everything looks like mistrust, whatever that is that got built in you at the beginning. And for me, it's all three of those things. So it's hard for me to have those conversations, but the only way to not have the rocks is the conversations along the way.
It's true, with a little caveat that sometimes this stuff is more about me than it is about you. So I resented my mum for wearing pop socks. There's no point in me telling my mum that I resent her about wearing pop socks because that's just her thing. So that again, with the sort of pruning thing, if I can sort through as much as I can by going, so is this actually an issue, or is this something, an old pattern that I haven't noticed, or what's my meaning making? Because all the time we're making meaning about things. We have our own interpretation that's completely unique to us. It's like we do have these masks through which we see life. I can see you perfectly clearly, but then you're going, but you've got this massive big thing in front of you. I'm like, no, but I can really see you clearly. But everything that's coming in is through this mask. And so when I actually do want to have a conversation with you, I can be really clear. Can we talk about that, please? That's the thing. It's not all the other stuff, all the other resentments that, and especially when we're in long-term relationships, it can be very overwhelming. And I never recommend that people do this. To confess the full extent of your resentment to your partner could be really damaging to the relationship, because most of it is not really about them, it's about you, and they remind you of so again, to be really conscious about what's yours and what is the unmet need, or what is the point of difference that we need to discuss, so that we can be really clear about what is the root of the issue, rather than just an unbridled expression of resentment.
Right. Instead of, as we would very crudely say in the States, a word vomit.
Exactly.
Instead of doing that to someone, and beautifully said by you, it doesn't help. If it's not something they can actually do something about, it doesn't help to do that. It's better for everybody involved for it to just be put down. You don't have to do that. You don't have to be right all the time. I want to go back to your comment about language, and we're sort of in it right now. So I'm sort of just pivoting a little bit in that I want your tips for the rookie forgiver, the person that is brand new on the block, looking for a way to start doing some clearing. What are the words we can use? What, especially with ourselves, to be gentle with ourselves in the process. But what are some of the things we can start to do around the words we use?
That's, again, lovely question. One of the things I want to say about words before I answer that bit of the question is we are often lazy or inaccurate with how we describe our feelings. As in, we say, I feel great.
I'm fine.
I'm fine. Exactly. So on a scale of like from sublime ecstasy and bliss to moderately out of pain at the moment and just suffering and getting on with life, feeling good, it really doesn't give us very much information. It doesn't communicate how you are, really. And learning how to be more articulate about your actual feelings in your body, first of all, means feeling them, which again, we're pretty hopeless about doing. And we have quite a narrow band. I think we're a bit like the paper guide on the printer. We just like, this is safe. I don't really want to feel too much of that or too much of that. And so we have, I feel good, or I feel bad, or I feel stressed again, or overwhelmed. And then there are some words where we're talking about what we think is a feeling, and we're thinking it's a feeling as opposed to it is actually a feeling. So when we're betrayed by somebody else, we say, I feel betrayed. Betrayal is as a consequence of a certain set of circumstances. The feelings when you are betrayed or believe you're being betrayed are usually quite complex, like anger, bewilderment, outrage, sadness. So there may be lots of different feelings in there. And we say, I feel betrayed. Or so it's, again, not accurate language. And culturally, we could do better. And if we say, I think that, or I feel that, if I feel that, usually that's followed by, I feel that you are blah blah blah. And then we say, but that's just how I feel. And that's not how we feel, that's how we're judging the other person, or our conclusions that we're and we have this real defensiveness about, well, that's just how I feel, which then means the other person can't counter it, because you can't really counter what somebody's feeling. If they're feeling anger, they really are feeling anger. And you honor that, you make room for it, but then you get curious about what's the meaning. Are they angry because they think you've betrayed them, or because they've misunderstood something, or they've misread the accounts, or, like there could be lots of things going
Or
on.
they came into the room angry, and you just happen to be in the
Exactly.
path of the angry.
No, I agree with you.
There's so much nuance. And I say almost constantly to people that ask me how I'm doing, I say, I'm tired. That is not how I'm doing. That is, to your point, you again so beautifully said, that is not a feeling. And generally speaking, that's even lazy, because there's a whole lot of things that come out of tired. Is it tired mentally, tired physically? Is there something specific that you're tired of? There's all kinds of beautiful questions we can ask each other in those moments. I feel, especially here in the States, that we don't invite it. We accept the lazy answer as well. We say, "Oh, wonderful, Barbara, you're great. See you soon. Cheerio. Have a good day." And that's the end of it. We don't say, "Are you sure?
Yeah.
What
Or
about?"
tell me more.
Right. What's
What,
so great about it? What's so fine about it? Tell me what that means. And it's so beautiful. I just saw an interview where Matthew McConaughey was talking about his parenting style. And the question came to him, how do you interact with your teenagers? And he said, I stopped asking them, how are you doing? I've now asked them, what's it like to be in 10th grade? What's it like during the summertime? How do you handle handle having the summertime? And it changes the way they answer the question, because it flips it from first person to third person, first of all. But it's not so nebulous. I find myself talking a lot, but I'm going to stop in a second, because I just want this one point to be made, that my husband will ask me fairly often, what can I do to help you? And my response is, I don't know, most of the time, because I can't get there. I can't get from what can I do to help you down to a task that I can actually give back and serve that, and he can serve me in that way. So I feel, in order to practice this, what I'm taking from what you're saying is to be able to ask those beautiful questions. Oh, great. I'm so happy to hear that you're fine. What about today is fine? What would make it excellent? what would make you feel excellent instead? It's those that I think just by digging in, just by being a little bit of aware of that and offering that option, we're giving each other the we give each other the chance to figure it out, to
Yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to practice articulating what you're really feeling, but also what you're thinking. And the distinction between the thinking and the feeling is also really important. And learning the difference and the fact that we are making meaning all the time can be, again, so helpful, because then you're not taking everything at exact face value, which is, through your particular filters. You have more, like a little bit more distance, a little bit more perspective, and then the curiosity can arise. Am I seeing this situation clearly? If you're tired, what kind of tired are you? Is there something you want to talk to me about? What support do you need to be less tired? Were you kept up late by one of the many children? It's like, tell me more. And I love that. I love the Matthew McConaughey. That's great. Great idea.
Tell me more is perfect because
Tell me more.
it doesn't have any boundaries. And it doesn't say, "Oh, great. Well, I just judged you on the inside, and now I'm gonna ask you a question that has to do with my judgment. Just tell me more. I wanna know more. I don't wanna just know, 'How are you today, Barbara?' I wanna know all of it." And giving ourselves that space to do so practices allowing safe containers and giving each other the space to do that, which also allows us to process, and all of the things start to happen all by themselves. Love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. And
Now
then
I'm
back
thinking,
to briefly to your question about like words to use.
yes.
Um, Inclusive, anything that's inclusive. So I've kind of created a 7-step forgiveness made easy process, which is what I take my clients through. And quite a lot of before you get to the process is really, that's the hard work, is getting ready. I often describe it a bit like when you're going to the Olympic Stadium. It's the journey to that before you actually do the circuit. Is the hard bit. So like admitting that you actually need to go to the Olympic Stadium is one of the first things. But during the process, I do use really specific words, and some of them come from NLP, from Brandon Bayes and the journey work that she's created. And one of my favorite phrases that I still use from her is, even though you blah blah blah, even though I don't condone what you did, even though, because the truth about this is, even though I have this resentment, or even though this thing did happen, I choose to not hold my grievance. And so it's something really empowering about saying, even though that happened, I recognize that my grievance is not helping. It doesn't change anything. This happened. It doesn't matter how much I resent you. It's not going to change it. It's not going to do the restoring that we want it to do. The only thing that can do that is like an inner reconciliation of what seems like it was lost, or what seems like it was taken, what needs to be restored. And one of the pieces that I do as part of the forgiveness process is an inner kind of exchange where, like, if there's something that you felt was taken, or something that was given too readily, or especially like in the cases of like a young child, if responsibility was put on their shoulders too young, then that can be removed and given back to the adult whose responsibility it was. Those kinds of things. So you're doing this really lovely exchange that does the equivalent of the reconciliation and the restoration, and all of that is done with as much honoring of the other person as possible, and of honoring of yourself. So there's room for the younger version of yourself to say ouch, to say I wish it had been differently, especially in cases of grief. I wish something different could have happened. And there may be anger, there's room for all of it. So there's room for anger, there's room for rage, there's room for regret, there's room for, like I said, the 3 different parts, which is, I may be doing forgiveness work on you, but there may be things I need to forgive myself for about my behavior. And there may be things I need to say I'm sorry for And it's really, there's room for a lot of honesty, authenticity, tenderness, kindness, compassion, for all the parties involved.
As well as that true empowerment and security to be able to do that work and to feel as safe as possible in being able to do it. That is brilliant.
Yeah, and that's why
Absolutely.
it helps to have a container, helps to be held to do the process. And just like any other ceremony, because I feel like it's a forgiveness ceremony, or like I call like an undoing vow. You're taking things back, you're releasing, you're relinquishing. And it is like the equivalent of a, like in other places where there's ritual, particularly in the Christian tradition, which is the one that I come from, but other traditions too, where there's a celebrant of some kind, the rabbi or the guru, like somebody holding the ceremony. Then there's like words, special words that are said, and there are things that happen, gestures made, or so it is like that actual process.
It's just beautiful. Love it. I think we could go on for hours and hours and hours. But audience, as you can tell from Barbara's wonderful accent, we are not in the same time zone, and we're gonna slow down here. But I know I'm gonna want to talk some more.
I'd love to.
Tell us how we can work with you, how we can find you, and how we can do this amazing work.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I have a book called Forgiveness Made Easy, The Revolutionary Guide to Moving Beyond Your Past and Truly Letting Go. It looks like that at the moment, but I might have the cover redone. But I love this picture because I actually contacted the artist to see if I could have permission to use it and paid for licensing because I loved it so much. But I just love the misery is coming from inside your own umbrella. And if you
Yeah.
take control of your umbrella, then you're free and looking up at the sky. And then, so my website is called forgivenessmadeeasy.co.uk. So that's how you find my work, and then you can apply to work with me one-to-one. And I also have notice of my forgiveness fields, my monthly classes on there too.
Perfect. I am so thankful for this conversation. I'm so thankful for uh, your work, your knowledge in this area, because it's so life-giving and it's so different than what we've known to this point. I think it's really revolutionary.
Thank you. That's my intention, is I really want to rebrand forgiveness as kind of like the go-to, rather than mindfulness. It's like, oh yeah, you're doing your forgiveness work. Yeah, amazing. I did a brilliant process the other day, to have that sort of different relationship with it, and not a sort of like earnest spiritual, like a religious thing, but just a really excellent secular ethics practice that could potentially change the world. And always my last point when I'm on a podcast, and I've really enjoyed our conversation and fantastic questions, so thank you. And I love your sense of humor as well, really lovely. Is that the potential of this kind of work is peace in the world? Because if you imagine like every single person just said, okay, I'll do my list, even if it's 36 like mine before I got to my mum, it's like, if it's that many, you just have to work a bit harder, but you could do it in a relatively short amount of time. And if every person did it, then we would be living in a completely different world. And we, obviously not everybody's going to do it. I am a bit more realistic these days, even though I like to think that everyone could. But if only a few of us decide that's what we're going to do, and taking care of your inner work has a massive impact. And I can't tell you how many clients that I work with who say, I did some work, they do the work with me, and then they go, you'll never guess what, my sister, she just said this thing she's never said before, and it's like the other person changes. And I love that, like you're stuck in this sort of like impasse, and then you move, and then suddenly the energy is moved, and it seems like the other person has changed. And it's because they're not getting this kind of like whole load of resentment that's in the field. It's like, if this is how you're coming to meet the person, it's like, I'm curious, who are you? Who are you now? What's new with you?
Gorgeous. Absolutely gorgeous. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So
Thank you
glad
too.
to
Thank you.